Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Becoming Anchored podcast. We are so glad that you're with us today. We have a very fun and exciting guest with us. I'll introduce her in just a second. So real quick, just to introduce the host, I'm Lauren Jackson. This is Laura Deneen. We are part of a group private practice in the Brentwood, Tennessee area called Anchored Counseling Company. We specialize in treating eating disorders, all the way to anxiety, grief, adjustment, life transition, that kind of thing. And we work with all ages through the lifespan. So we're super excited to be with you guys today. And we've got some fun things to talk about that I think a lot of you guys will be able to relate to. So a quick disclaimer, this podcast is for educational purposes only. This is not meant to be your therapy. So if you do find that as you're listening to our content, you could benefit from therapy, we would love for you to reach out to us. If you're local, we'd love to connect with you and get you scheduled with one of our therapists. If you're not local, find someone close to you who is a licensed therapist. Today, we have Sarah Beth with us. We're very excited to have her. So Sarah Beth is one of our wonderful staff therapists here at Anchored. And so she just brings so much wisdom and knowledge, and we're really excited for the topic that we're going to talk with her about today. Yay, welcome, Sarah Beth.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, echoing Lauren, Sarah Beth is just a gem of a human, and I just am so grateful for her. I know Lauren is so grateful for her. Anchored would not be what it is without Sarah Beth, and we are just so grateful for her wisdom today on the show. Sarah Beth actually started her internship with us, and I'll let her introduce herself here in a few minutes, but has been with us going on 3 years and actually serves as our marketing director, so does all of the fun elf, we say like elf marketing tasks, so like dropping cookies off and donuts off and all the other fun things for the practice. And then she, of course, sees clients, and I know that she really enjoys that work as well. So thank you, Sarah Beth, for being here. If you're new to the Becoming Anchored show, really the purpose of this show is twofold. First and foremost, it is to share about our experiences, first and foremost, as humans. Lauren and I love to talk about the hard things in life, the painful things, and also the things that we're celebrating and our wins, so to speak. And we're humans first and foremost on the show with you all. And then we have the incredible gift of sitting with clients on a daily basis. And we love, love, love that work as well. We have learned a lot over the years as therapists, and our hope on this show is to share some of those nuggets of wisdom with you all. And so welcome. If this is your first episode, or maybe you've been riding along with us, and we're super grateful to have you. So thank you so much for being here. Today, we are going to be talking a little bit more about athletes and the nuances of treating athletes in eating disorder recovery. Sarah Beth is a wonderful guest for this topic. She is an athlete herself, and she treats a lot of our athletes in the practice. And so I can't think of a better person to speak on this topic today. So welcome, Sarah Beth.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I would love for you to share a little bit more about yourself, just so our listeners know a little bit more about you and what makes you.
Okay. So like I said, I'm Sarah Beth. I've been at Anchored about 3 years now, going on in August. I cannot believe that. But I work predominantly with our eating disorder athletes, is predominantly where my passion is, especially anorexia nervosa, a lot of the perfectionism, some OCD, those kind of things. But I just have a special place for athletes. Like Laura said, I've grown up in the sports world and the athlete world. And so it is a big part of identity, is one of the things that you had shared. And so I love being able to come beside people in the fitness and just that world and that realm, and just really be there while they are working on maybe coming out of disordered eating disorders, distorted thinking patterns, just that identity piece of trying to discover who they are. And then just working on emotion regulation as well, and just sitting with the emotions that come with who am I and why did I become an athlete in the first place, and all of the fun things that come with that. So absolutely love what I do, and I'm excited to be able to talk about it today.
Yeah. Oh man, this is a big topic. So we're so glad you're here. And there's lots of different things that I think that we could touch on. But yeah, when we were talking a little bit before the show about what we wanted to talk about, I know that we briefly mentioned just that identity piece that can feel so pertinent when we are working with an athlete that is also in recovery from an eating disorder. So Sarah Beth or Lauren, I'm curious, when y'all are first working with an athlete, and I know all three of us have worked with athletes, what are things that you both feel sets this population apart from maybe somebody who hasn't grown up in an athlete world or in the athletic world?
Well, I think the biggest thing is just the identity piece. Like you were saying, what sets them apart is this idea of, oh, you're so-and-so that won the gold medal. You're so-and-so that did this. And it's based on the performance piece. And I think a lot of the identity that goes into it is the fear around letting those that support you or cheer you on in a way of letting them down. And so that fear of failure. So a lot of the athlete identity piece that sets them apart is the piece of, oh my gosh, if I fail, right, then I have let everyone down. Am I even really an athlete? And am I even really good at what I do? And I think a lot of the identity piece is not even the sports itself. It's the coaches, the family, the friends, the supporters, the people that are on the sidelines that are like, hey, go do your best job. And to them, it's, did I even do my best job? Am I even doing my best?
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think even just with our culture, and for the record, we are pro everyone on the show, right? We're pro athletes, we're pro artists, pro creatives, whatever makes you. So we are certainly pro athlete health as well. And I think one thing that can happen in the athletic world is that your performance as a whole becomes who you are, and it becomes what we call in the therapeutic space enmeshed with who you are. And this idea of achieving or setting the record becomes all consuming. And even I'll talk to parents who have children that are athletes, scheduling time for sports and activities that involve athletic things, they take up so much of the client's life. And so it can become all consuming. And so I think there is this piece where it does feel like it is who they are, even if it's not necessarily who they are, it's a part of who they are. So I feel like that was a long-winded sentence, but I think the nature of being in a sport can evoke this sense of, no, this is just who I am, when I'm not saying that it's not important to that person, it's not something that they love, but it really is a part of who they are. But because of the nature of schedule, and maybe they're on the road for their athletic thing that they do, that can feel like it's who they are. And so I think that's just another nuance of treating this population that I've found as well.
Excuse me. Another thing that feels really unique to athletes in eating disorder recovery is the level of activity. Even when we're getting into, I mean, don't get me wrong, high school sports are very competitive. Even like recreational kind of sports outside of school can be super competitive, but you get into like college sports and then professional, it's like the amount of activity is exponential, which can be tricky to navigate in the recovery process, because the activity piece in and of itself, whether it's, I don't know, football or gymnastics or tennis, whatever, right, is so integral to the thing that they're doing. So that can be so sticky. So I can get into some of my story a little bit in this episode, but the level of movement it's just high. It's just really high.
Yeah.
And that can be such a tremendous part of an eating disorder as well. And eating disorder behaviors is exercise, right?
Yeah. Well, and nourishing yourself appropriately to correlate with the level of activity that you have. If you have an eating disorder, those two things are not aligned, right? And so that's what we're working towards is, hey, you may not be nourishing yourself in an adequate way to sustain the level of activity that you are consistently engaging in. And so then it begs the question of, okay, is it appropriate for the athlete to take some time off? Do they need to take a break from their sport? And that can cause just an emotional response, understandably so. But these are big questions that we're talking about, and nuances, like Lauren said, that are pertinent specifically to this population.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Sarah Beth, have you, just out of curiosity, I'm sure that you've worked with people that have had to take time away as they're in eating disorder recovery, people that have had to take time off. What is typically their response to that?
It's very fair. And I think that it comes from example, like college, we'll use college athletes as an example. So like we're talking 2-a-day workouts, everything's planned from the morning to the evening. And that is a big piece, right? Like they're doing that 5 days out of the week. They're performing on the weekends. That is a chunk of their life. And we're coming into recovery, right? And we're trying to learn how to correlate and connect that eating disorder recovery with the athlete piece. And it's a lot of fear. It's a lot of fear around, hey, this is what I've been doing. Just like you said earlier, Laura, with like kids growing up going to sports games and that being the regular and doing it all the time. And like movement is 100% intertwined with that. And so a lot of fear, a lot of just scaries in some ways, just scary of what will happen to me. What if I come back to my sport and I'm not good at it? What if I lose all of the talent that I put into that? And I think just a lot of fear and just a lot of what if this happens? What if that happens? What if nothing changes? What if?
Yeah. And this comes up for the record for those of you that are listening across the board with clients. And even in my own story, I tend to excel at asking what if questions. And so one of the best things that has been fruitful in my own mental health journey is really coming back to that present focused awareness of appreciating the present and naming what is happening for my own self in the present. So moving from what if to what is true. And that can be an intervention that we are actively working on with our athletes in the practice is, hey, I understand that you have an incredible amount of fear of taking time off from your sport, if that is the case for them. And sometimes not everyone needs to take time away, for the record, but let's practice naming what is true for you right now instead of creating all of these possible what if scenarios, because really the possibilities are endless and that's not super helpful for our brains to imagine all of the possibilities. And so what that might look like in a therapeutic session is, hey, yes, this is a time when I might need to take a break from my sport. This is what I need to do for my eating disorder recovery in this moment. This is really hard. This is really painful. This might have a lot of grief that accompanies this. So those are things that we would be working on to help a client move from the what if possibility scenarios back to what is true in this moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would say that is true for really anybody in recovery from an eating disorder, particularly the athlete piece and kind of that identity part that we've been talking about, how that can get so enmeshed with the sport that sometimes that time away is actually really important in differentiating eating disorder from like self and then the sport as well. Laura, you said this earlier in the session that we're obviously pro athlete, right? It's if you're an athlete and you do a cool sport, that's so cool and how amazing. I grew up in a pretty athletic home and did lots of sports growing up, and then I was a ballet dancer for a long time, and so it was kind of my sport. But I'm curious, and I can speak to this as well, but Sarah Beth, have you noticed like any of your clients going through this recovery process, maybe taking some time away if that was necessary in their recovery, and creating a recovery kind of self, and then discovering that they maybe didn't want to do the sport anymore? Yeah. I see you nodding your head. Yeah.
Yes, I've had actually quite a few. Not that a lot of people didn't go back. I think a lot of people kind of discovered within themselves the reason they were still staying in that athlete mindset was not the reason they had started that athlete mindset. So when they started that sport, just like you said, you did ballet, right? You started the ballet, you loved the ballet, but along the way, somewhere something, and not for your story, but somewhere something within these people, these clients got twisted and turned. And the thing that they loved about the sport in the beginning was not the thing that they discovered that they loved about the sport once they came out of it. And so a lot of them made decisions when they were coming out that they can still be athletes, but that their identity was not in the sport itself or being the athlete. It's them. Like they discovered, oh, it's me. Like at the end of the day, the reason I was doing these sports was because I can do the sport. I love myself and I love movement, but I also know that to love myself and love movement, I've got to also find other ways of love and movement in my life. And so a lot of people tend to walk away from that sport or that identity piece around what they have created, thinking that was what they wanted and that their life was indulged in it. But then they found another area where they can indulge and find life too.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is actually part of my story. I know we're all kind of giving glimpses into our stories today, which I think is helpful for our listeners, right? We're not robots and we certainly are not perfect, and nor do we claim to be. But when we moved back from overseas, so I moved back from living overseas when I was 14 and I started running cross country. And I remember it was really hard for me to take a day off of running. And at the time, this was really the onset of my eating disorder. But I remember looking at my mom, and she had encouraged me to take a day off. I think we were on vacation or something. And I remember looking at her defiantly and being like, I am a runner. And I think I might have shared this story. Lauren and I did an episode on exercise and ED recovery and movement and ED recovery recently. And it's interesting because as I've gotten older, I don't enjoy running. And part of my recovery work has been recognizing and naming that for myself. And while I don't necessarily identify as an athlete and didn't really grow up in a super athlete or athletic focused home, that is interesting, right? Because I don't run anymore in my recovery. And now I've been in recovery for a long time at this point. But I left that because there was so much pain involved in that. And I didn't really feel the need to go back to it after I'd gone through the recovery process. But that's not to say that some people that are runners that are in recovery from an eating disorder can't continue running as they move through recovery, right? I think each person's story is so unique and nuanced. But my story was that like, hey, I want to find other ways to move my body that don't involve running. And that's okay. A college athlete or even like a professional athlete. But that's just a small like kind of glimpse into, yeah, if you choose to leave the sport that you were doing, there is going to be pain. There is going to be grief with that. And there's going to be pain no matter whether you choose to leave or not, right? If you're in recovery from an eating disorder, you could go back to the sport once you are fully recovered, and that's still going to be painful because you're going to be different on the other side of eating disorder recovery. And so all that to say is I think there's pain whether you choose to stay in the sport or not.
Yeah.
Lauren, I see you nodding your head. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, because there's grief either way.
Sure.
You're kind of losing something, right? We talk about this in eating disorder recovery. There's a grief that happens in losing this thing that has been so important, that has been such an important way of coping and of making sense of the world and feeling in control of your life, right? So I mentioned before I was a ballet dancer for 10 years, and that was what I was going to do. I was going to be a professional ballet dancer. And Sarah Beth, you spoke to this so beautifully earlier, that sometimes when we start out in a sport or in like an activity and we come to love it and we have this passion for it, and then maybe we develop an eating disorder and then we discover on the other side that the love we had for it before isn't the love that we have for it after. And that is 100% my experience. I fell in love with dance and I just had this kind of natural rhythm. I don't know. And so, and I'll speak to this a little bit too. I think there can be some personality traits that are pretty common within the athletes in general. Maybe we tend to be pretty perfectionistic, really high achieving, go-getters. We want to do the best. We want to be the best, which are all great traits, but can also be a breeding ground for eating disorders if we're not careful, or if that happens, it can lend toward that pretty well. So along the way, my identity, like we've been speaking to, became very much so enmeshed with, I am Lauren, the ballet dancer. Everybody knew that. I was proud of that. I was horrified of letting anybody down and of not being that person that I felt like people needed me to be. And to help me cope with that, to help me cope with the pressure of that and the distress of that, I developed anorexia. And I eventually started recovery and went through the recovery process. I came out the other side and decided that life in recovery was not going to, I wasn't going to be able to live a life in recovery, also be a professional ballet dancer. There are people that are, and that's great. And that wasn't what I wanted, and that wasn't going to work for me. And I realized through the recovery process that along the way in my ballet journey, I started not loving it so much anymore, but because I believed so deeply that everybody needed me to be a ballet dancer, I just had to do it. So that was a really big reason why the eating disorder developed, because it helped me do the thing that I thought everybody needed me to do. And so then I realized on the other side that I didn't have to be anything but myself, and I didn't have to prove anything to anybody. And that was just like the most freeing thing ever in the whole wide world. And so I did quit ballet, but then I found myself kind of a few years past that season going to some ballet classes for fun and kind of still being able to engage in that space in a way that was completely different than how I engaged with it in the eating disorder, which was really healing for me, actually. And then there are different parts to my journey of like movement and stuff, but I've found that I can move in a way that feels healthy and safe to me. And it doesn't include ballet, and that's okay. And I still love ballet. It is so dear to me. It will always be so dear to me. And so yeah, that identity piece just rings so true. And I think that there's a healthy way to have our identity in something and it not be enmeshed in it. Yeah. And I had to figure that out through that recovery process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what you're really referencing too is this idea that we talk to clients a lot about, whether they're athletes or not, is being in our bodies. So embodiment. And I think if an athlete is in recovery from an eating disorder, anyone who has an eating disorder, I hesitate to use blanket statements, but typically struggles with being in their bodies, right? And so I think that a lot of the work we do, whether it's with an athlete or somebody who's not an athlete, is really working towards embodiment. So, hey, does the sport that you're engaging in, does that allow you to be in your body in a way that feels safe to you, in a way that feels aligned with your values, in a way that you're able to show up in your life well and in a healthy way, right? Versus a rigid or rule-driven way. So those are all things that we are talking to clients about. And some people are able to resume their sport and do that in a way that is healthy, and some people aren't. And there's no judgment either way. But I'm curious, Sarah Beth, like in your professional experience, just to put you on the spot here, is there anything that you have found really is supportive to helping people, whether that's athletes or people that aren't athletes that are listening, be in their bodies? Anything that you're doing in session, anything that you're giving as homework outside of session?
So my favorite thing, I always I talk with my hands. So when I'm sitting with clients,
Yes.
No. So when I'm sitting with clients, my favorite thing is to talk about that emotion, thought, behavior, and physical sensation. And one of the things that I typically break down for my clients is that our bodies and our minds are so disconnected. And I even will have them disconnect in that moment. And I want them to physically do it. I'm like, okay, let's disconnect, because I think that sometimes our bodies tell us things that our minds are just free sheets to the wind, right? And then vice versa. And so one of the things that I really try to do with my clients, once we can establish and sit in, okay, like my mind might be saying something, my body may be saying something completely different, is learning to reconnect both body and mind. And a lot of things that I will do is like planting our feet on the ground, taking a stand up, sitting back down, deep breaths, holding our stomach or holding our chest area. What are you feeling? What are you actually feeling in your body compared to what do you feel? And I think a lot of it is realigning and reconnecting our brain in some ways to our body. And so I'll have a client that, hey, I had this thought this week, but they're also telling me that their body felt something completely different, which is so disconnected. And so it's establishing that realignment. And so I'm one of those people that like when my client stands up, I'm going to stand up with them. We're going to do some circles or whatever it's going to take. But I really try and get them, even homework wise, hey, I want you to identify 3 things that your body is telling you, not your brain. What are you feeling in your body? When you get anxious, are you tense in your shoulders? When you are feeling the need to act on a behavior, what is your stomach telling you? Do you feel like what? And it's realigning that. And I think that I like to do just like physical, grounding skills. What can you touch? What can you see? What can you taste? But really trying to reconnect that misalignment in some ways, because it can feel so just chaotic. And it's, what am I actually thinking and what am I actually feeling about the same thing? And that's one of my favorite things. Like my clients would be like, are we standing up? I'm like, yeah, we're standing up. Put those feet on the ground. Do this. Are we taking deep breaths? We're doing deep breaths. Let's do this. I really want you to feel your body compared to just perceiving yourself, because we perceive ourselves as, oh, this is what my body da-da-da-da-da. But what is your body actually telling you? And what is your thought aligning with that, with your body?
Yeah. And we know that our emotions show up in our bodies first and foremost, right? And so really looking at those physical sensations as a cue to our emotional state, right? And that can tell us what's happening. And then, like Lauren talks about pretty frequently on the show, is that can cue us into what we need of being in our bodies and starting that process. I think that really is a lifelong process of, as we move through different seasons, whether we have been an athlete historically, or maybe we're letting some of that identity piece go wherever we are, really cueing in, I think, to our body's physical sensations and what information that's giving us. And I agree with you that we do live in a world where head, mind, body, heart, spirit are all disconnected. And even for us as therapists, right, we can move through the day and sometimes I can go home and feel disconnected. And so that's certainly not a judgment, but it's really that question and that curiosity of, okay, how can we reconnect to our bodies in this moment? And that's fruitful whether you're an athlete or not, right? Yeah. Sarah Beth, thank you so much for being here today. It's a true joy and honor to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So we always close with some homework and an affirmation. I know that Sarah Beth is going to give the affirmation. So Sarah Beth, I would love to hear what you have for us today.
Yes. I am more than the sport that I play in the identity piece, and that I'm me. And that's good.
I love it. I love it. Lauren, do you want to close with our homework?
Yeah. So I'm going to kind of go off of what Sarah Beth was like literally just saying about in the eating disorder process, we can typically be disconnected from our body. And so I want you to notice 3 things that your body is telling you this week.
I love it. Thank y'all so much for being here on the Becoming Anchored podcast. We are so grateful to have you with us, and we will see you next time. Take care.